This year, our story is all about a woman named Gladys Aylward. And I want to be the first to welcome you guys to the Inn of 8 Happinesses. Our sign up there says the Inn of 8 Happinesses. And the Inn of 8 Happinesses was the first place that Gladys Aylward did her missions work in China, where she travels to. But I'm not going to tell you anything about that today. I'm going to tell you today all about who Gladys was before she ever got to China. What was Gladys doing when she was younger? That's some really cool. Don't you guys like to know what she was doing when she was a kid? Yeah, 100%. Well, to start with, Gladys was not born in China. She was also not born in the United States, where we are. Gladys was born in a country called London. Hold on, let me back up. You love London? I love London. All right, I'm going to show you where it is on a map. This is where we are, okay? Now, all the way across the ocean, like this little blue island right here towards the bottom, is London, okay? Way over here. Now, she is going to end up traveling all the way to this giant blue country, China. Okay, that's where the Inn of 8 Happiness is in. But we're going to start her life today in London. Now, Gladys was the oldest child in her family. If you are the oldest child in your family, raise your hand. Do we have any oldists? Oh, lots of oldists. Yeah, look at that. She was the oldest, and she had 2 younger siblings. And her family were Christians. So she was born into the home of 2 Christian parents. Now, they were not a wealthy family. They were just your average family. Her dad was a postman, which is like a mailman, which is, I think, a really fun job. He got to deliver people's mail, which I don't know about you, but I'm really excited about getting mail. So I bet people were excited to see him. You are too? I love getting mail. And so she started going to school when she was younger, just like you guys did. Now, she liked school because she liked to work hard. She liked to be around other people. Her teachers really enjoyed her. Like, her personality was such a joy to be around. And when something was hard, she wouldn't give up. She would keep on trying. But Gladys did not do very well in school, because even though she was so kind and she was such a hard worker, she just really had a hard time remembering all of the information, even though she tried so hard. And so there were things like she had lots of good things to say, but she also couldn't write it down very neatly. Her handwriting was sloppy, even though she tried to not make it sloppy. And no matter how hard she tried, she just couldn't really remember math very well. Do you ever have a hard time remembering math? It can be really hard, okay? Yeah. And so that was where Gladys was at in school. She was a joy, but she just couldn't remember things. And so when Gladys was 14 years old, she stopped going to school, and she started working to help her family. Now here, we go to school all the way until we're 18, and some people can go to school even after that. But at least 18 is typically when we start. So 14 seems pretty young, but at Gladys's time, that actually wasn't totally crazy. And because she wasn't very great at school, it made sense. And the first job that she had was at a really cool place called a penny bazaar. And it's a little shop, and it's called a penny bazaar because there was nothing in the shop that cost more than a penny. Now, a penny is the lowest valued money that we have. It's that little copper coin, and nowadays, you really can't get anything for a penny. You use your pennies to add to other money so that you can get something. It's really not something you can use all by itself. But this store was a whole store dedicated to things that were a penny. And she thought it was pretty cool. And she said, now I know how I'm going to get all my Christmas shopping done, because I'm going to get it all at Penny Bazaar. But her dad said that she had a hard time choosing what she wanted to do. So she didn't stay at the Penny Bazaar. She tried some other things. And eventually, she ended up working as a housemaid. Now, Gladys is not in this photo, but this is a photo of other young housemates, some of whom might have been around the same age, 14, 15, 16. It was not uncommon to have young girls from poor families or just average families go and work in the homes of very wealthy families who lived in these big, beautiful homes. And so that's what Gladys ended up doing. And one of the things she loved about doing that was that this home that she worked at was in the big city area of London. So she was surrounded by bright lights and lots of people and things like the movie theater. Gladys loved to go to the movie theater. She had a cousin that she would bring with her all the time. And Gladys would watch the movies and she would daydream about being one of the actresses on the screen, right? She loved to do that. And then her normal life felt kind of boring to her, but she felt like she could escape a little bit when she would watch the movies. Now, one day, she was out walking around London, which she loved so much. She was about 18 at this point, and there was a group of other kids about her age, and they smiled at her, and they said, hey, you should come in to where we are. And they roped her into kind of coming in to this meeting that they were having, and it was a church meeting. And she was kind of frustrated because she didn't really want to be at a church meeting. Now, remember, Gladys grew up in a Christian home. She was not a stranger to church. She had been to church many times. She had heard them talk about God and the Bible and Jesus, but she wasn't really interested. But something happened at that meeting. She began to get interested. She began to feel a heaviness about her own sin. And shortly after that meeting, God saved Gladys, and she repented and put her faith and trust in Jesus Christ. And shortly after she got saved, Gladys had a burning desire within her to go be a missionary in China. And her parents kind of thought, maybe it's a phase, maybe it'll die down. But it didn't. Gladys was determined, I need to get to China. And so in London, there was a special place called the China Inland Mission. Now, this was a place started actually by a man who had been one of the pioneer missionaries in China. And he started this place to train up other people who also wanted to be missionaries in China and send them to China. I mean, this seemed like the perfect place for Gladys. That's what she needed, especially because, well, she stopped going to school at 14, right? It was years later now. It was, over 10 years later. She was 27 by the time she went to this school, and she needed help. I need training. And so she interviewed and applied to go to the school, and they said, yes, you can come into our program, but it's a probationary period. We have to see how you do. And if you do well, you can continue in the program. Now, once again, Gladys was one of the hardest workers. She was very neat and tidy. She was one of the oldest, and so she would even help some of the younger girls. And everybody liked Gladys. Everybody thought she was great. But once again, Gladys had a hard time actually learning the material. She just could not remember it, and she failed her tests. And so after 3 months, her teacher said to her, we're so sorry, Gladys, but you can't stay at the China Inland Mission. You can't be a part of our program. And they liked her so much, they were really sad to have to say goodbye to her. So one of the teachers really wanted to help her out. And he said, hey, there is a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, and they used to be missionaries in China, and they need a housemaid. And you were a housemaid, so you can go work for them. And that was very kind. And Gladys was thankful for the job, but she was really disappointed. She was pretty convinced this was going to be the answer, and this was going to be what God used to get her to China, and clearly she was wrong about that because she wasn't going to be able to keep being there. So she went and worked for Mr. and Mrs. Fisher, and they were very kind people, and she asked them all kinds of questions about China, and she would write down all the answers in her journal, and Mr. and Mrs. Fisher saw pretty quickly that Gladys was really made to be more than just a housemaid. She had such a desire to share the gospel with people and such a desire to be doing ministry all the time. So they found her a position with a rescue mission that was in another area, and she went and lived there, and she began to help rescue young girls who had no place to stay. And they would end up just living on the streets without help. And so Gladys would go, and she would rescue them. She would bring them to a place to live, and then she would share the gospel message with them. And this was great work, and she really loved it, and these girls she was helping, they really loved her. But you know what? It wasn't in China, was it? No. And that's where Gladys really believed she was supposed to be. She really believed that God was going to use her in China. And so even though she loved all the things that she was doing and was having such a wonderful time, she said, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to go back to London, and I'm going to save up money so that I can go to China by myself. Can you imagine? All alone. She had never been very far on her own. And now she was getting ready to go, you saw how far it was, crossing lots of countries, crossing water to go to a giant country where she knew no one and had never been. But that's how determined Gladys was. So she found a job working as a housemaid in the house of a very wealthy family. And when she got there, she had spent her money on the train ticket and arrived and was shown to her new room, and she had just one coin left, one piece of money. And she prayed. And she prayed and said, here is my Bible. Here is all the money I have. Here is me. Find some way to use me, God. And right as she finished praying that prayer, another housemaid came in and said, Gladys, the lady of the house wants to see you downstairs. She didn't understand why. Was she in trouble? Did something happen? So she goes down to see the lady of the house, the woman who owns it, and the lady very kindly says, how much did it cost for you to get here? How much did you spend on your train ticket? And so Gladys told her, and she took out her purse and handed Gladys that money. And she said, I always pay for my housemaids when they have to travel. Gladys had been a housemaid many times before, and this had never happened. No one had ever paid for her train ticket. Already, she could see that God was providing for her. She saw this as such an encouragement that God had heard her prayer and immediately began to answer it and show her that he was going to provide for her. So she thought, okay, what can I do with my money to already start my travel plans to China? So she went down and found a shipping company, and she walked in and she said to the man, how much does it cost to get to China? Now, she was all alone, still a young lady, and her clothes were not very fancy or anything, and she didn't have a whole lot of money with her. And so that man, when he looked at her, he laughed. Have you ever been super serious about something and someone laughed at you? That is so discouraging, isn't it? But even if she was discouraged, it is disrespectful. You're right. But even though she was disrespected and discouraged, she had not lost hope. She was confident in what God had called her to do. So she said, no, honestly, I want to get to China. How can I get there? There's got to be another way, something that's not going to cost so much money. And he says, sure, there's one way that you could get there, as long as you don't mind ending up dead when you arrive. She said, what? He said, well, there's the train, and that costs only about half as much. But the train is going to take you through a part of China that's at war with Russia. And you'll probably be dead by the time you get there. But Gladys didn't believe that, because she believed that God was going to use her as a missionary in China, not as a dead woman in China. And so she said, that's okay. I'm not afraid of the war. I would really like to go. And so the man thought she was kind of nuts, but said, okay. And so he took her money as like a down payment. And she said, I will come every time I have more money, and I will put more money towards my ticket until I have enough to go. And he said, okay. So Gladys went back and worked and worked and worked. Not only was she working as a housemaid, but she was so determined to raise the money for China that she also took other jobs here and there. If someone in the area was throwing a party, she would go work at the house for the party. So she was working all the time. And although she was tired, she was excited because she was saving money. She was getting the money together that she needed. And you know what happened? You know that man that disrespected her and laughed at her? He actually grew to really like Gladys. She would come back all the time with more money and put money towards that ticket. And he began to really enjoy seeing her and asking her questions. And she was able to be a light even for the gospel in this man because he saw her trust in the Lord and her determination to do what she thought God was asking her to do. And so when she was almost there, as far as saving up enough money, she heard about a certain woman, a woman named Mrs. Lawson. Someone was telling her about Mrs. Lawson, who had been a missionary in China for a very long time. But her husband had died, and so she had moved back to England, near where Gladys was. But she didn't really want to be in England anymore. She missed the Chinese people because she loved them so much, and she missed preaching the gospel to so many people in China who needed to hear it. So Mrs. Lawson went back to China, and she was really hoping to have someone to go back with her, but she hadn't found anybody to go, and so she ended up leaving by herself. Now, when Gladys heard this news, she thought, oh, it's me. I'm the one that's supposed to go with Mrs. Lawson. I know, this is what God has had for me. So Gladys was very excited. She was able to get the rest of the money that she needed for her train ticket, and she wrote Mrs. Lawson a letter, and she said, I'm coming. This is a young Gladys Aylward. And so now Gladys not only had the money to go, but she knew finally where she was going. She was going to go, that's right, there's pictures over there. She was going to go learn from Mrs. Lawson. If she couldn't learn from the China Inland Mission Assembly, maybe she could learn from a missionary herself. And tomorrow, you guys get to hear all about the treacherous train journey through war and find out how Gladys arrived in China. Are you excited about that? Yeah! It is an excellent part of the story.